When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Confessional. User: LostSH3PH3RD. Posted: November 2nd, 1995.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I've heard that line thousands of times over the decades I've sat behind the screen. Whispered in shame, muttered through tears, barked defiantly by those who didn't come for penance, but rather performance. It doesn't shake me anymore. Not murder, not betrayal, not the sort of sins that keep most men up at night. At least, not until him. That night, the church was empty. Just a few votive candles flickering in the alcoves and the familiar scent of melted wax thick in the air. I had just about closed the confessional when I heard the heavy wooden door at the back creak open. Footsteps followed, slow and hesitant. I settled back in and waited. The curtain slid aside with a faint rasp. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It was a low, almost a hoarse voice, like the man had been rehearsing this moment for years. I gave the standard response. How long has it been since your last confession? But he didn't answer. It was at the parish fair, he said, like we were already mid-conversation. Back in '76, you know the kind. They used to set up booths all down Main Street. Sausage dogs, cotton candy, screaming kids on the tilt-a-whirl. I was working the ring toss that summer. Just some dumb 20-something who didn't know anything about anything. Certainly had no idea what was next. My spine straightened. I didn't say anything. She was older, mid-30s, with brown hair that always slipped out of its pins. Beautiful in a way that girls my age weren't. Elegant, I guess you'd say. She came by with her kids, 2 boys. One of them had a cast, bright blue, I remember. She smiled at me, not just polite. It was real, warm, made me feel like I mattered. He paused, breathing deep, and I felt my heart start to quicken with anticipation. We started meeting after that, just talking at first. She said her husband didn't confide in her anymore, said she felt invisible, alone, so would sit under that old pecan tree behind the community center and talk for hours on end. Honestly, I thought we'd pick the spot because it was public, safe, but deep down I knew. That back courtyard was as secluded could be without a door. My hands had gone cold. The thing is, she lit up when she saw me. First time I ever knew for sure with complete certainty that I truly meant something to someone, and that's how I knew what we had was real. The feeling, that is. And yeah, I thought maybe I could save her, sure. Maybe I deserve that kind of love. What can I say? I was young and naive, but that is how it started. At that point, I stopped the gentleman. Sir, is this something you wish to confess? My voice was thinner than I intended, a little shaky even. She came to me in the fall, he continued, ignoring my inquisition. She told me she was pregnant and said it was mine, that it was time to come clean. We had made a mistake and now it was time to own it. The gentleman paused. I closed my eyes, afraid of what was next. I panicked, told her there was no way it could be mine, that she was crazy. We'd only done it twice, and now she was ruining everything. We fought, screamed at each other in that courtyard, and then he took a long breath. Let's just say she tripped. That's how it started. It hit her head. Blood was everywhere in seconds, flowing out from behind her ear. She was still alive, trying to scream, I think, her lungs rising and falling like she was trying to catch her breath, but before a sound came out, I covered her mouth. I didn't want anyone to hear. I didn't want anyone to know. When it was over, I dragged her to the car and put her in the trunk. I didn't even pack a bag, just drove, dumped her off a service road 2 towns over. I thought the animals would take care of the rest, and maybe I was right because they never found her. Nobody even looked. I guess everyone just figured she ran off. Before the gentleman could say another word, I jumped to my feet and burst out of the confessional, heart hammering, screaming at him, "Who do you think you are?" as I yanked open the other door. But what I found wasn't an old man sitting on the bench confessing to murder. No, there wasn't anyone there. The booth was empty. I stumbled back and tried to catch my breath, find balance. Where had he gone? Was he ever even there? There was no lingering shadow, no echoing footsteps, no trick of the light, just the hush of an empty church and the faint buzz of old fluorescent bulbs. I spun around, searching the pews, the vestibule. Nothing. He was gone. Unless, maybe he'd never been there. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I left the church unlocked, candles still burning on the altar. I didn't even grab my coat when I left, just my keys. I drove west with no destination, and by morning, I was across the county line. Now, I'm holed up in a roadside motel, one of those places where the neon sign flickers and the ice machine wheezes all night. The carpet smells like mildew, the walls are thin, and I haven't slept more than a few hours in 3 days because the man in that booth knew everything. Not just the fair, not just the kids. He knew the cast was blue. He described the tree by the fence. He used the exact words Marion had used on that god-awful day, words that had echoed in my head every time silence found me. I truly loved her, I really did, but I was so young, still learning how to wear the collar and carry the weight of it. She came to me sad, bruised by years of life beating her down, and I told myself I was comforting her. I told myself I was doing God's work. But when she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I didn't mean to kill her, at least Not at first, it really was an accident, but there she was on the ground and I didn't know what to do, and honestly, I still don't. Maybe I'll drive a few hours west in the morning, find a church in a parish where no one knows me, and finally deal with my soul once and for all. Maybe I'll sit down in a confessional and tell my story just like he or it or whatever that was confessed to me. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been far too long since my last confession.
Subject, Catch of the Day. User, ATL00328. Posted, October 11th, 1997.
In 1979, Georgia Power flooded the area that would become Lake Oconee, and in 1982, I started fishing it. The shoreline was wild back then, and not so many folks were keen on pushing through it to get to the water. A whole day could go past without the sound of a single motor. When the light was low, you had to watch where you were going in case one of the downed trees that had worked itself up from the bottom thumped into your bow. I never had much trouble that way, but I remember the time Kenny Thompson got swamped when one of them rocketed up from beneath and flipped him right over. Underneath the water, so many bass flowed through the bushes and grass beds that you could just about get as many with a kind invitation as with a lure. And if you used a lure, brother, you were going home with as many fish as old Joe Frank allowed. As time passed and more people started using the lake, my boat got lighter and lighter on the homeward trip. There was some talk about it being an old Native American curse, especially after some folks pulled in bass that were just about white all the way through. The curse talk came from the fact that back before Georgia Power flooded the valley, the University of Georgia found the Cane Island site out by Long Shoals. My brother Eddie works over there and told me about some of it, that the evidence they found proves Native Americans were living along this part of the Oconee 10,000 years ago. From what I understand, they were a farming people and not in the habit of bothering anyone. If any of them were in the business of cursing, I assume it was the kind we all do when one of these tourists rip around in their powerboat, scaring the fish as opposed to the long-term variety. No, the fact of the matter is, the more people fish a spot, the fewer fish there are going to be. I'm no genius, but that just seems like simple math to me. That's not to say there isn't something wrong with the water, it's just not the thing everyone thinks it is. I know because I've seen it. One of the best times to fish for bass is during the shad spawn. For bass, spawning shad are like those Pringles chips. Once they pop, they can't stop. So your best bet is to park yourself in the rocks closet to deep water, where shad like to hang out. The third component to success in this kind of bass fishing, in addition to the shad and the rocks, is shade. And so, one early morning a couple weeks back, I found myself out on the Oconee fishing the riprap around a bridge abutment. A slow, steady retrieve is the key to a bass's heart, so I was sitting back, quietly reeling in my spinnerbait and enjoying the gentle bob of the water. If you can hit the lake early enough, you start to feel like you're outside of time, like those Cane Island folks might just be around the bend, tending their crops and roasting their corn. The lure was out of the rocks by now, drifting in a section of deep water, and I was so lost in thought it took me a few seconds to notice the tug on my line. A second after that, and the line jumped out further into the center of the lake by a good foot, then two, the real worry. My spinnerbait was completely out of sight, dragged down into the murk. No matter how hard I gripped the crank, it refused to move back towards me, so I focused on not letting it out any further. Everything to this point had been instinctual, but as I fought like hell to keep my now guitar string taut line from running away, a thought occurred to me. This is one hell of a fish. With that, the line went slack and I was able to start reeling it in again. Leaning back in my seat, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That particular spinnerbait had been one of my favorites, but there were plenty more in the tackle box. I was idly wondering which I'd drop next when the slack on the line was taken up again, this time pulling so hard the rod was yanked clean out of my hands. A brand new Shimano reel on a custom Loomis rod dragged down under the water and out of sight. A lifetime of fishing, and never once had anything fought me so hard and snatched the goddamn rod from my hands. I was so mad I could spit, staring dumbly at the surface of the water. To add insult to injury, the ripples had almost smoothed out completely, as if the whole thing hadn't happened. Well, I thought, may as well head back. All the tackle in the world isn't worth jack shit without a rod to cast it with, and I'm not going to be seeing that one again. My hand had only just touched the throttle when the universe, deciding to play yet another grand joke on me, proved me wrong. Over by the riprap where the shad were skittering around, I saw bubbles rising to the surface, sort of like when a scuba diver is about to surface. Had I hooked a goddamn skin diver? If so, how stupid do you have to be to see a fishing boat above you and not know you need to give it a wide berth? Now that I had someone to be mad at, I couldn't wait for him to come up so I could give him a piece of my mind. What came out of that water was no scuba diver. I guess you could at least say it was in the shape of a man, but that's where the similarities between me and it ended. The thing that walked slowly up out of the water was pale, sort of a yellow-white color with what looked like a network of spidery blue veins beneath the skin. Its head was bald. In fact, it had no features on its leathery body at all, except for what looked like thick, stiff webbing around its upper back and shoulders. When it turned around, I got to see the punchline God had cooked up for me. There, in its cheek, was the protruding hook of my spinnerbait. The silvery fishing line extended from it, running down its body into the water below. The creature was too far away for me to see its eyes in detail, but in my bones, I knew it was looking right at me. With slow, deliberate movements, the pale fish man thing reached one spindly webbed hand up to its mouth and carefully began to work the lure loose. Rivulets of black liquid, blood maybe, ran down its chin, dripping into the lake water below. Not once did its gaze waver during the entire process, making sure I watched every second of its ordeal. I swear it was like a combination of America's Funniest Home Videos and that alien autopsy video. Once the silver spinnerbait was out of his cheek, the pale creature pitched it back into the water, practically daring me to go find it. There wasn't a hope in hell I was going to get any closer to whatever the hell it was, so I finished saying an internal goodbye to my rod and reel and slowly nudged the throttle forward. The creature was clearly tracking my movements, its eyes locked on me until I made it around the bend and disappeared from its line of sight.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.